With Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, today we're going to jump on that Sharp Interactive board. HP published their second quarter numbers, so we have 6 months worth of numbers for HP's FY 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, I took this flashlight that Pollock & Pollock sent me. You know Chris Pollock at Pollock & Pollock? He's the guy that has the alternative toner. So if you have like an overreaching OEM, if you have an OEM that keeps raising supply costs, you reach out to Pollock & Pollock and they have an alternative supply for you, help you save some money, help you get away from these overreaching OEMs. But I took this flashlight he sent me and I shined the light on HP's financials. I went to HP's website under the Investors Relations tab. It's all right there. I looked at their presentations. Under the Investors Relations tab, I was able to find the 10K, the 10Q, and the 8K. I went back and looked at some 10Ks. And we all know that you have to fill out the 10K, the 10Q, and the 8K if you're a publicly traded company. I mean, you got to do this. It's a legal thing you got to do. And in these 10Ks, in these 10Qs, and Form 8Ks, guess what? There's a lot of information with details that you don't necessarily see in the presentations. And sometimes those details are pretty alarming. And they were really alarming for me, especially when I looked at HP's supply business by dollar amount and the decline it's going through. You see, in the presentations, they just lump it all together. But on the 10K, they actually separated it out. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in today's episode. But let's talk about the numbers real quick. So the numbers for the quarter in the printing business were $4.7 billion. That was a 4.6% decline year-over-year growth. The numbers for the personal systems for the second quarter were $8.1 billion. You ready for this decline number? 29.1% decline year-over-year growth. These are horrific decline numbers, folks. That personal systems business is just literally falling off a cliff. If you look at the 6 months total revenue for these two groups, printing is $9.3 billion and personal systems is $17.4 billion. We're going to dig into these two groups with some details. But before we do that, I wanted to share this slide with you. I wanted to look at the liabilities and the assets. I wanted to look at the cash and cash equivalents. Let's start there. In October 31st of 2022, cash and cash equivalents at HP were $3.1 billion. As of April 30th of 2023, cash and cash equivalents are $1.9 billion. Well, folks, that's $1.2 billion less in 6 months. We start getting worried about that, right? I mean, think about this. QTR is about a $15 billion company. They got more in cash and cash equivalents than HP, who recently did over $60 billion in business. So you can see that should be an alarm bell of some sorts. Let's look at their assets and liabilities. HP, as of April 30th, 2023, their assets were $36.4 billion. Their liabilities were $24 billion, 66%. That's a big number. Remember when I shared QTR, what were they, around 24%? I think when you get over 40%, alarm bells should be ringing. But they're right in line where we see Konica Minolta. Konica Minolta 65%. Back in October of 2022, or January of 2023, it was 70%. It's gone down a little bit, but it's still alarming. Here's a graph that might help you see how alarming this is. Let's look at the cash flow. FY 2022, okay, net cash provided by operations was almost $5 billion, right? $4.5 billion. Free cash flow, well, back in 2022, it was $3.8 billion. It's sitting on $541 million. Not good. Let's dig a little bit deep into this printing business. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what I wanted to do is I wanted to look and see where are we at in the printing business if we compare it to the same time last year, so the first half of 2022. And right now, the personal systems business is $6.3 billion decline over the first half of 2022, and the printing business is at $500 million decline over the first half of 2022. So in the printing business, there's a $500 million decline over the same period of time last year. Folks, $500 million in the printing business is a big number. And when I looked at the 10Ks and I looked at where they were in 2018 and where they are today and where they're going to be at the end of 2023, it's alarming. And I'll share that with you in a minute. But we all know that the profitability for HP is in that supply business. And when you have a $500 million decline for the first half of the year, what if that decline ends up being $1 billion by the end of the year? If it's $1 billion by the end of the year, do you realize that the printing sector is 20% operating profit for HP? Well, if they lose $1 billion worth of business in the printing sector, that's $200 million in operating profit. In the personal systems business unit, they get a 5% operating profit. If you lose $200 million worth of operating profit and you wanted to make up for that in the personal systems business, well, guess what you'd have to do? You'd have to sell $4 billion worth of product. How are you going to sell $4 billion worth of product in the personal systems business when it's already sitting at a $6.3 billion decline over the first half of 2022? This is not good in any shape of the imagination. The total revenue is at 6.8% decline over the first half of FY 2022. Let's look a little bit deeper at the printing. Let me just share some numbers with you. Supplies down 4%, the seventh straight quarter of decline, 7 straight quarters of decline. Printing carries the company's operating profit. We all know that. But folks, I just shared with you what it would take in revenue and the personal systems to make up, $1 billion lost in the printing sector based on the 20% operating profit the printing sector gets. But we know inside that printing sector is where the supplies are. And the supplies alone is probably most of the 20% operating profit. Meaning for when you sell $1 billion worth of supplies, there could be like 40% operating profit in that. So what if you lost $1 billion just in the supply business? Would you then have to do $8 billion more in the personal systems business to make up that operating profit? Because in that group, it only runs at 5%. This is why I hate when they just use the percentages. This is why I love to dig in to see the big numbers and then start imagining how they're going to make up for this. Because we know that print's going to continue to decline. And we need to start paying attention to this. So I wanted to show this slide because I think it's graphic. It kind of shares with you the story, the alarm bells, the warnings. 7 straight quarters in the row of declines in the supply business. When I do the recap of HP's third quarter, I'm going to dig into the hardware piece, but right now I want to focus on supplies because these numbers should scare the hell out of our whole industry. Quarter 1, supplies down 2%, supplies down 2%, supplies down 6%, supplies down 7%, supplies down 9%, supplies down 10%, supplies down 4%. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an alarm bell. Wait till I share with you the numbers that are attached to these. Let's look at the personal systems. Folks, we all remember that HP bought Poly. Okay? They finalized that deal in 2022. So the Poly numbers should be in the personal systems numbers. And just to remind everybody, when HP bought Poly, they did $1.6 billion in business. They did $1.6 billion in business, so $1.6 billion in business over the year would be added to HP's personal systems revenue, would it not? But yet we see how much they're down. They're down $6.3 billion from the 2022 number. So if you added in half of that 1.6, almost $1.7 billion of Poly, are the personal systems really down $7.1 billion pre-Poly? I mean, it looks like they bought Poly, they added, $842 million worth of revenue over 2 quarters, but yet it didn't help them because the personal systems were down $6.3 billion. So they got a bunch of debt to grow, and they didn't even grow. But something very, very interesting happened at the beginning of this year, folks. HP decided they were no longer going to classify notebooks in its own category. And now they only have 2 categories. They have commercial personal systems and consumer personal systems. And the notebooks are in there. Because I think HP got tired of the whole world looking at the declines they were having in notebooks. Because when you think about notebooks, you think about this little notebook here on my table, you think, oh, everybody could use one of those. Why aren't people buying more notebooks from HP? And then when you look at the major, massive declines in the notebook sales, well, if you were an investor, you'd probably freak out. So what does HP do? Well, they just stop telling you what they're selling in notebooks. Let's just lump it all together. But even if they lump it all together in these two categories, let me just read off the declines in these two categories by units and by dollars. You ready for this? Total units down for both categories is 28%. Consumer personal systems units down 34%. Commercial personal systems units down 23%. Consumer personal systems revenues down 39%, and commercial personal systems revenues down 24%. Everything's down. The units are down and the revenues are down. How are we going to make up for the losses in the operating profit from the supply business that's also going down? This is alarming. Where's the accountability to that Poly acquisition? So I wanted to show this slide just to remind everybody about the personal systems business, and I want to focus on the notebooks. We'll focus on total units, and then we're going to focus on these notebooks because they used to actually tell you what the notebooks were doing on their presentations. So ladies and gentlemen, let's look at it. Quarter 4 of 2021, total units down 9%, notebooks down 12%, total units down 6%, notebooks down 9%, total units down 17%, notebooks down 23%, total units down 25%, notebooks down 32%, total units down 21%, total notebooks down 26%. And then what happened? We get into 2023, let's no longer share with the world the decline in notebooks. But guess what? Units down 28%, units down 28%. I got to ask this question. Will HP's FY 2023 be HP's worst year of growth in its history? I believe it will be. It'll be the worst year HP ever had in growth year over year. They're going to break records this year. They're just breaking them in the wrong way. This was on the website because I was really concerned that they took the notebook classification off for the public to really look at that. And I just got to ask the question, did HP change reporting in personal business to hide the lack of notebook sales? Did HP change reporting in personal systems to hide the lack of notebook sales? Absolutely they did. But here's the deal, folks. The world's not stupid. And the hype and that big bubble that I explained about HP a couple of quarters ago, where they sold all those notebooks during the pandemic and they were all excited. But even then, the units were going down, the revenues were going up, and the only reason the revenues were going up because of supply and demand. There was not enough supply. HP had some supply, so they were able to satisfy some demand. They raised the prices. And I told HP back then, in the episode, you're never going to be able to maintain this. Because once the supplies come back, the demand will lessen, and the competition will be fierce. The competition will be fierce. And now we're starting to see the fierceness of that competition. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the problem. On the 10K, they share the supply dollar amount. And when you really start looking at the supply dollar amount in the printing sector, it gets really, really scary. So let me just share some quick facts with you. If you look at how many supplies were sold in the year 2018, it was 13.5 billion, almost 13.6 billion. In the year 2022, for that year, the supply business was 11.8 billion. That's a 15% decline in supply business from 2018 to 2022. I believe, I'm going to predict it now, that at the end of FY 2023 will be the very first year that HP goes below $11 billion in supply business. And when they go below $11 billion in supply business, and you compare that to that 2018 number, that's big. That's 20%. And ladies and gentlemen, when HP starts losing $1 billion in supply revenue, and then they lose another $1 billion in supply revenue, and all the profitability that goes with that supplies revenue, where are they going to make it up? Their personal systems business is in rapid decline in its own right, and it only runs about a 5% operating profit. I commend HP for maintaining the 20% operating profit in the printing business. But the problem is, it's unsustainable, because now you're going to be forced to raise your prices as your supply business continues to evaporate from a revenue standpoint. And as you start to raise your prices, those resellers and channel partners are going to start looking for alternatives like my friends at Pollock and Pollock. And you think you have pressure now from non-OEM toner. Wait till you start raising your prices. All those friends of mine that signed that Amplify agreement, and I was screaming from the top of the mountain, do you know what you're signing? Be careful what you wish for. Because as HP starts to raise their supply prices, and they are going to raise their supply prices, you cannot sustain this decline. HP's already at $500,000, $500 million in declines in supply business for this year. Folks, they're probably going to be $1 billion behind last year by the end of this year in supply business. All the subscriptions that Enrique Loris would brag about selling every time he would get on Jim Cramer's show. We're selling all these subscriptions. It's not helping. Because by the end of 2023, we're going to be down 20% from 2018's number. And now I want to add this in the mix. In 2018, that $13.6 billion worth of supply business, guess what that included? Well, that included all the Samsung stuff they bought. Right? So all the Samsung stuff they bought added into the revenue in 2018, and I guess it all evaporated. We went out and we grew through debt, and we lost all we bought. Apparently the same thing happened with the acquisition from Poly. Let's look at this personal systems. Ladies and gentlemen, this is disastrous. I mean, the first 6 months of 2023 to FY 2022, it's horrific. You know, in FY 2022, they did $44.1 billion in that personal systems business. 6 months into FY 2023, we're sitting on 17.4. Folks, even if they doubled that number, which they didn't do in 22, and they're not going to do it in 23. But if they double that number, they're coming in $9.3 billion short off of FY 2022. We're talking about $10 billion less than the year before. Why is the investment community not screaming about this? I want to wrap it up with this slide because I just think it's the most ridiculous thing that's ever gone on in corporate America in our space. The insanity of HP and the board allowing them to buy back $15 billion of their own shares. And ladies and gentlemen, you can see the share price. It ain't ever going back to that $40 a share. That was the hype. That was the bubble. I talked about it. I did a detailed presentation on this. I pulled all the share prices the day they bought all this stuff. And most of the time they bought their own shares, they were buying at the highest price. HP's investors are going to wake up one day. More importantly, I believe the short sellers are going to start digging into HP, and you're going to start seeing something happen. And remember, folks, I told you a long time ago, as HP goes, so goes our industry. We need to pay attention to these folks, and we better be prepared, because the day's coming where our industry is going to get more scrutiny on it than it's ever had in its history. And everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see you all tomorrow.